Hey guys, alright, so today we're looking at writing our linear equations. So the last few days we've been working with finding slope and finding our y-intercept. So all of that from last week is going to build today into making our equations once we find our slope and our y-intercept. So some of this will be a little bit of a review. So remember, in our slope-intercept form, or our y equals mx plus b, our m is the slope. The thing attached to the x, the coefficient with x, is our slope. And then the plus b or minus b is our y-intercept. Remember that if it's a minus b, that means that it's at a negative point. Okay? So, if we are given the slope and the y-intercept, so we already know that slope is -2 and our y-intercept is -5. We're just going to plug in the information that we have into our equation. So slope represents m, so we're going to plug -2 in for m, and y-intercept represents b, so we're going to plug 5 in for b. So our equation would be y equals -2x plus 5. Let's try our next example. So again, they tell us the slope is 3/4 and our y-intercept is -3. So in my m, I'm going to plug in 3/4, and then for b, I'm going to plug in -3. So y would equal 3/4 x plus -3. But we don't like to look at this plus negative, right? So we're just going to change it to y equals 3/4 x minus 3. Alright, so let's move on and let's look at when we're given the slope and a point. So some of you guys were actually doing this last week when you were finding your x or y-intercept when we were given slope and a point. So you can actually do this for that as well. We're going to take the base of our equation, y equals mx plus b, and we're just going to kind of plug in again what we know. So we know m, or our slope, is -5. So in my equation for m, I'm going to plug in -5. But this time, I actually know an x and I know a y, so I can plug those in to that part of the equation. So for y, I'm going to plug in -1, and then for x, I'm going to plug in 1. So remember that m and x are being multiplied, so I need to make sure my 5 and my -5 and 1 are also being multiplied. Then from there, I don't know what my y-intercept is. So that's what we have to find so that we can write our equation. So you can do any of the steps to finding y-intercept like we did last week. This is just a different way or a new way that we can also do. So if I go ahead and multiply and solve, I get -1 equals -5 plus b. So I add 5 to both sides to do the opposite operation. So then I have 4 equals b. So now I have my slope, and now I have my y-intercept. So I can write my equation as y equals -5x plus 4. Let's try the next example. Okay, so again, I know what an x is, I know what a y is, and I know what the m is. So in my equation, I can plug 7 in for y equals the 3m for m and the 2n for x, and then we're just looking for our y-intercept. So I get 7 equals 6 plus b. So I subtract 6 from both sides. So I get that my y-intercept is going to be 1. So my equation is going to be y equals 3x plus 1. Alright, last example. So same thing. So I know my y is negative 4 equals negative 1/4 times my x, and then we're looking for b. So remember, when I multiply fractions, top times top, bottom times bottom, so I get negative 4 equals negative 1 plus b, because I would get negative 1 times 4 and then 4 times 1, which is negative 4 over 4, which simplifies to negative 1. So then I would add 1 to both sides to get negative 3 equals b. So then my equation for y equals mx plus b would be y equals negative 1/4 x minus 3. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to looking at finding it from a table. So this should be review. We did do this last year in 7th grade. We've been kind of doing it on and off a little bit the last 2 weeks without really talking about it, so now we're just going to really talk about it. So our first step is to make sure we find the slope, and we find that slope by the change in y over the change of x. Be careful on this. On the last quiz, there was a few of you that were putting the x over the y. The y has to go over the x. Okay, then from there we'll find our y-intercept again. So if I look at my first example, my table is going up 2 for y and up 1 for x. So my slope is going to be 2 over 1, or just 2. And then if I look in my table, I can actually find that my y-intercept is at the point 0, 1. So my y-intercept is actually going to be at 1. So now that I have my slope and my y-intercept, my equation is y equals 2x plus 1. Alright, let's try our next one. So I have that we're going up 8 on our y, and then we're going up 2 for our x. So our rate of change or slope is going to be 8 over 2. And 8 over 2 simplifies to 4 over 1, or just 4. And then I can look and I can go backwards and do my pattern. So I can subtract 2 to get to 0. And then subtract 8, and 5 minus 8 will get me to negative 3. So my y-intercept is going to be negative 3. So now my equation would be y equals 4x minus 3. Alright, and our last example. So same thing, I have 11 to 15 is plus 4. And I have 1 to 2 is plus 1. So my slope is 4 over 1, or just 4. Then if I subtract 1 to 0 and subtract 4 from 11, I get my slope intercept is 0, 7, or 7. So my equation would be y equals 4x plus 7. Okay. So something else also that we can do when we are given a table is if we use our calculator. So if you look at your calculator, there's a couple of things, or there's a trick that we can do. Okay, so on my calculator, if I go to the Stat button right here under Delete, so if I go to this button right here, it will give me a list of options. I want to go to Edit, so I'm going to hit Enter on one. So I have a list or a table that I can make. So in your table, you can use L1 to represent your X's and L2 to represent your Y's. So let's take the second example, that we just did. So if I look at my x's, I have x's 2, 4, 7, 9, and 12. If I scroll over to L2, those are going to represent my y's. So when x was 2, y was 5. Then I have 13, 25, 33, and 45. So I've created the table in the calculator. So from here, I can hit Stat again, arrow over to Calc, and if you scroll down to number 4, it says line regress, but if you look, it says AX plus B. So the calculator will write it in our y equals mx plus b form for us. They're just using a for m instead. So when I hit enter, it will take me to this screen, and I hit enter again, and it's telling me for y equals ax plus b, but our a is going to represent m, that a is 4 and b is -3. So if you look back at that example, we got y equals 4x minus 3, which is the same thing. Okay? You can do this with any calculator or for any table, but do remember the steps if you choose to do this, because I cannot remind you on a test or on a quiz what the steps are. So if you choose to do this option, make sure you remember the steps. If you want to clear your table, instead of going through and deleting everything, you can go down to clear list, enter, then hit second stat, and then hit L1. We'll clear our list, go back to stat, clear our list again for L2. So now we have a fresh new table that we can type in another example. Try it with the other two examples of the tables and see if it works the same way. Alright, let's go ahead and look at writing the equation from a graph. So, from a graph, we know how to find the y-intercept. We know that the y-intercept is where it's going to cross the y-axis. So, on our first graph, it's crossing the y-axis at this point. That's our y-intercept. So, our y-intercept is -5. So, remember, we find our rate of change, or our slope, by rise over run. Okay, so we're going to count how many we rise. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we run 1, 2, 3. So our rate of change, or our slope, is 4 over 3. And I can just leave it like that. I don't need to change it to 1 1/3. I can just leave it as 4/3. So my equation was y equals 4/3 x minus 5. Okay, let's try our next one. So if you notice, this line is going down, so we need to have a negative slope. So our slope needs to be a negative number, because now we're not rising, now we're falling. So remember, a fall is a negative number. Okay, so from this point, our y-intercept is at 1. So we know our y-intercept is 1. Then we're going down 1, 2, so it's a -2, and over 1, 2, 3, 4. So our rate of change, or our slope, is -2 over 4, which simplifies to -1/2. Now be careful, there were some people getting a little confused with simplifying on the last week's quiz, so be careful. So our equation would be y equals -1/2 x plus 1. Okay, you have 2 more examples. Go ahead and try those with your table group. Alright, let's take a look and see how we did. So we know our, oops, my bad. So we know our y-intercept is going to be at a positive 2. So we know y-intercept's positive 2. And we know our slope is going up 1, 2, 3, 4, and over 1, 2, 3. So our slope is 4/3. So our equation would be y equals 4/3 x plus 2. So our last one, we had our rate of, our y-intercept is at -3. And then or you could have gone to this point. So if we find any point, but because this line is going down, we need to make sure it has a negative rate of change, a negative slope. So we're going down 1, 2, 3. So -3 and over 2. So -3/2. So my y equals -3/2x minus 3. And there you have it.